Thunderfoot made the claim that atheism was being poisoned by feminism and tearing our community apart because we should all agree, or at least keep our mouths shut about feminism, and fight together for atheism to rid the world of evil religion. Catty feminists are poisoning that by shoving their agenda in the realm of atheism, then continue to make video after video after video to help split the community further. Well, I hate to say it, but secular history is something most people in both the atheist and feminist community are really bad at. Mostly because one poisons the other depending on which group is more accepted than the other. The secular movement has gone through many waves, as has feminism, and quite often have peaked off base with each other. The first wave in America came with the founders. Jefferson completely secularized the schools in Virginia, and many other places followed. After he died, they slowly were able to seep religion back into the schools. At the same time of the founding, there was a clamor and a hope among women, Abigail Adams being the most prominent, that they too would have equality in this new nation they also sacrificed for. Of course, that didn't happen. In the late 1800s until around the turn of the century, the non-religious were at around 40%, and feminism was rising thanks a lot to the efforts by a woman by the name of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was both one of the first feminists and at least an agnostic, if not an atheist. Susan Jacoby discussed her in a lecture posted below. The three top paid speakers in the US were atheists, with Mark Twain in second place, right behind Robert Ingersol, a man most people in the atheist movement have probably never heard of. The man would have been lumped into the second wave feminists, demanding that scientists and doctors should discover a safe birth control so that women could choose to be pregnant or not, or they would never truly be free. In the early 1900s, Elizabeth Cady Stanton died before seeing women having the right to vote, and she was pretty much wiped out from the women's rights movement because religion came into an uptick and they couldn't have her, an evil atheist, as their figurehead. Her legacy wasn't rediscovered until the 70s second wave movement, and most Americans still don't remember her. They barely remember her partner in crime, Susan B. Anthony, and only because she was on the dollar coin, which no one ever uses. Robert Ingersol had tremendous political influence at the time, as atheists were considered neutral parties among the divided religious factions of the time. Why it took another 60 years for a Catholic to get elected. They didn't trust other denominations at all, and Christians and non alike came to hear him speak because he was such a great orator. He was wiped from history for his atheism and his feminism. Religion deleted him from the American consciousness. The Great Depression drove people to depend on churches. The Red Scare came following World War II, and atheism became un-American and something to be feared and suspicious about. Atheists kept to themselves, but the younger baby boomers were ready for free love, and that allowed a window for feminism to grow again. They made great strides for women. Prior to Roe v. Wade, the churches were at each other's throats, but suddenly they began to band together, and slowly they stopped seeing each other as evangelical or Methodist or Catholic, but Christian, creating a hierarchy, of course, better and lesser denominations, but from that they became a political movement, and something that they were not beforehand. On top of this, more secular women were having less kids, and more conservative families were not using birth control. At the beginning of the century, liberal Christians in America made up 2/3 of the religious population. At the end of the century, 1/3 made up the religious population. Things like the wedge movement and dominionism started working hard to get religion into school, politics, media, entertainment, and science, which they succeeded in politics and media, but there was always serious pushback from secularists and feminists who the religious groups labeled and dismissed them all as atheist sluts or baby eaters. This is because only people with a looser dependence on the following of the Abrahamic religions, or an utter rejection of them, were capable of seeing through the subservient position that women were put through by the religion. At this point in time, feminists could and may very well have had something similar going on if they had YouTube around at the time, and caused a divide in the movement, if they believed that atheism was being injected into their movement. But atheism and feminism have always been tied together. There are some feminists that can still hang on to their faith, but many of the greatest feminist thinkers were agnostics or atheists, or vice versa. Madalyn Murray O'Hair was an outspoken atheist who worked to get forced prayer out of schools, and while she had something of a spiky personality, the abuse she got from most people explained a lot. There was no need to vilify atheists at the time. It was all too easy. The 80s and the Reagan Revolution came through. The new political religious right began cranking up their power base, and the anti-union, regulation, anti-tax for the rich found them a useful tool in moving forward their movement and began pumping money into it, including the C Street Gang, which you should definitely look up if you haven't. It became a heyday of attacks and misinformation about feminism. Atheist sluts, they were called, because they didn't have to vilify atheists at the time. They were already crushed and stigmatized enough. Atheism was at that time poisoning feminism. They began abusing terms, using the exceptions of the fringe feminism to paint them all as the same way, just how they did to vilify people on welfare, union workers, regulation, basically any law they didn't like, and hype this outlier as the stereotype of all cases, actual statistics be damned, and people ate it up, mostly because of the level of money for think tanks was pumped into it to help frame the conversation, to change the very worldview of the formerly Roosevelt America. The 90s came around, and potential regulations for climate change began to worry carbon producers, so they began throwing their lot in with a religious right. Science was barely questioned by most people prior, Republicans especially during the Cold War, because that was our way to compete and beat the Soviets. Scientists were used to just saying, Russians, and the government would hand over science money to protect us. Suddenly now, we were the only superpower, and money flowed into science denialism. Talk radio became a powerful voice to misinform regarding feminism. Rush Limbaugh is gloating in an article below about how only 30% consider themselves feminists, and it was largely due to him, as he coined the term feminazis. This was one of their main goals. In the 90s, if you listen to comedians including George Carlin and Bill Maher, it became edgy to make fun of feminists. It was a lot of change at once going on with equality in the workplace and anti-harassment policies and laws being formed, and a lot of change causes confusion and some lunacy that makes for easy comedic fodder. Being anti-feminist in the 90s was perceived as the bad boy culture, even though feminism was still not the majority. Creationism got the funding it needed to try and wedge its way into schools and misinform kids about science. The untouchable science budget began to be looked at greedily by people who disagreed with science and didn't want more evidence to be discovered against things they were making money off of. Scientists were confused or in denial for the first 2 decades of decline. Then 9/11 happened. Islam came into awareness for the first time in U.S. history. Science denialism and radical religion for the first time allowed people like Dawkins and Hitchens to no longer sound so crazy and evil. The internet exploded with our pro-science spending period. The internet exploded from our pro-science spending period back in the 60s and 70s, and YouTube and other blogging sites were formed, which allowed for many atheists to meet online for the first time and spread their ideas instead of keeping it all in the closet about it. Last year, we reached over 25% of non-affiliated, and if we keep working on it, we may reach 40%, which was around Ingersol's time. However, the moneyed interests are smart and learn to play both the religious and the non-religious sides into adopting their ideas using astroturfing methods. They have hijacked much of the terms of science and use cult science to skew words like skepticism and journals and study, creating this mindset that you, since you are smart, you must certainly be educated enough to go beyond your level of expertise, which completely goes against Sagan-style skepticism. This created the truthers, the birthers, the anti-statists, the race realists, and now the alt-right, who treated all official statements and claims of people with specialties and credentials as obviously a lie and the sheeple just following blindly. Which brings us to today. Feminism is a belief in defending equal political, economic, and social rights for women with men. Much like atheism, it doesn't say anything about your views on men, sexuality, porn, methods to reach those goals, or anything else you believe or don't believe in. There are many types of atheists, some weak, some strong, some anti-theist, some pro-peace and pro-love, and some full of rebellious hatred and bitterness. Many libertarians, some few conservative, and many liberal. To say you're a feminist, therefore you believe blank, or you believe an aspect of feminism, therefore you believe blank, is exactly like saying if you're an atheist, therefore you believe blank. It's even worse if you have an opinion about them without actually reading anything written by the academics in that area, just like so many do with atheism. Many feminists are also very pro-man, and they feel breaking down the gender roles will actually help men socially and health-wise. There are many strategies and ideas in feminism, just like in atheism, each one with their belief of where we should focus our efforts and resources. Some use ridicule, which hurts the feels of people who disagree with them and make them angry. Some believe calm, empathetic education, while more boring is the better way to move our issue forward. Many are shaped by political ideology. Liberal feminism views use of laws to advance women. Radical feminism, misused by the alt-right, believes that we must work hard to change the attitudes of society first. Then the political laws will follow. There is even a libertarian feminist movement called individualist, and one that is a socialist variant. The variant that has been most tied to feminism, that is actually an extremely microscopic minority, is the separatist feminists, who believe that all men are evil pigs and women should all go off and form a lesbian utopia and use science to eliminate the need for men. This tiny microcosm of feminism is what the alt-right, religious right, and the GOP trots out as all feminists, just like they trotted out Stalin and Mao as all atheists. Feminism is in the middle of regaining its feet and shaking itself off the way science did in the 90s and atheism did in the 2000s. Women's reproductive rights are being attacked constantly in state legislatures. Most Americans are anti-feminist but claim to believe in gender equality, which is good, but until men and women have equal level of problems in society, I'm not gonna call myself an equalist. I'm a feminist who's pro-male, anti-gender roles, and sex-positive. I don't deny the social sciences as soft sciences, and act as an apologist that men actually have it way worse, and rationalize away data that I'm not qualified to analyze or debate, and neither are you. Feminism is taking the negative aspects men do face that women don't, and are working to end that or balance it out more. Feminists and atheists are tied to each other through history, each one poisoned and strengthened the other, neither saying anything about personal, political, or philosophical beliefs or ideas. Atheism was not poisoned by feminism. Atheism just got to the population level where we, at least the white males, no longer felt in danger or as persecuted, and we realized just how different we all are. Some wanted a pro-feminist atheist group of their own, and they were vilified as the majority in the current atheist movement is white males. It's why these days most of the YouTubers I watch that focus mostly on atheism are women and minorities, as most of the white men are just repeating the stuff I was hearing 10 years ago. Women and minorities have such a fresh viewpoint, it's fascinating to hear. We've reached pretty close to all the white men we're going to reach for now. The big frontier in atheism is now to reach women and minorities, who have different reasons as to why they stay in religion than white males, and different social pressures. It's both reaching people with diverse social needs as well as adjusting to diversity of political and philosophical ideologies, and unless we realize this and begin to actually listen to them and include them and their needs, atheism will be poisoning itself from stagnation, never changing, angry, bitter, and inclusive.